Well, I guess let's welcome Jared Michaud back to the Brothers on Books podcast. Jared, I think the first time we had you on was to discuss your book Brightstar,
Yeah.
which was the first book in your Enigmatic Six series. Uh,
Energemetra 6. Yeah.
and Enigmatic Six, yeah.
No
I
worries.
I can read sometimes.
I'm
But
one for the
that's
unpronounceable words.
yeah, I had some complaints about that in the book. There are a lot of those. Uh,
That's all right.
But yeah, that was episode 97 for our listeners that are just getting caught up and they want to go back and listen to the first one. Jared, I mean, I guess just how have you been? Why don't you just give us a brief rundown of what you've been doing since the last time you came on?
I've been drinking from the fire hose of learning how not to do this, man. I mean, writing a book is one thing. Trying to get it in front of people so that they can read it is an entirely different ball of wax. And I know nothing. I know nothing, and I'm just barely starting to learn, I think. That's basically been the extent of what I've been doing ever since. Though I have done some more writing and I'm working on publishing more books, as you saw, but just trying to get people to read them is the tough part.
Yeah, that,
Well,
I feel like
Mhm.
no, go ahead, Jack.
I was going to say for the listeners that might be also contemplating doing this, what have you tried so far?
Well, okay, so there are a couple of normal ways to do this. One is there are a lot of people who try to market on social media. And whether it's just that I'm really bad at social media or that it doesn't work very well or a combination of the both, I don't know. But I threw a couple of months down a black hole and got basically no results trying to use social media to market my books. It hasn't worked at all. I get the idea social media is sort of for retaining your audience once you have some, keeping in touch with people, that sort of thing, making sure you stay on their radar. It is not for getting new people interested in your stuff, as near as I can tell. So that's something I tried that didn't work at all. Then I tried going to things like Comic Cons and selling my book. Um, and it kind of works a little bit, but you're lucky if you just sell enough books to pay for the table and maybe the gas to get there. You're not going to sell more than that at a Comic Con. I think there are other events that you can do probably. I've done some sitting in grocery stores actually. There's an authors in grocery stores program where you can sit in grocery stores and sell your books. And that has worked somewhat. It's kind of a low cost option, but they take 40% of the cover price for every book you sell. So you're paying a big percentage of everything that you would make. So that's a downside, but it's still a way to get books in people's hands, which is great. The other thing that I'm working on that I haven't done a lot of is the paid advertising thing, but I don't have a lot of means to do that. So trying to figure out how to approach that in a way that's sustainable has been something of a trick for me. I know there are systems that are supposed to help with it, but I'm sort of feeling my way into it. And if I can make that work so that it just pays for itself, I will be totally happy because getting somebody interested in the series is that's a huge benefit to me because then they want book two, book three, book four, and
Hmm.
that's awesome. Um,
Hmm.
so that's sort of where my efforts have been. I've done podcasts, I've done all the different things, and I've made a few sales through podcasts, and that's great. And I don't know, I enjoy getting on podcasts like this just to talk to you guys about what I'm doing. It sort of energizes me to sort of, you know, talk about the whole thing. So
Okay, so unfortunately, you cut out a little bit for me, but I had just a couple quick questions based on, I guess, the beginning of that talk. So
yeah,
for you, you're talking about the social media. Were you? Let me just rattle them off all before, and then you can answer them however you see fit.
you got it.
For the social media, did you have a big social media presence before you started writing? Like, were you very engaged in that space? For the Comic-Con, I guess, do you see any? Not necessarily like, I guess if the sales at the Comic-Con are maybe only covering the table, do you see residual sales or like friends introducing uh their friends to your work? Because I was just from like reading the two books, I would imagine Comic-Con would be a good place to pick up either current fans or future fans. And then you were just talking about the grocery store. Have you ever tried just doing like a book signing at like a Barnes? Because I've gone to a couple of those, and even if you don't know, it's like a weird situation because even if you don't know who the person is or what their book is, you kind of want to like buy it just to read it, to say you have met them.
Yeah. Um, so first off, no, I did not have any social media presence to speak of. It was basically zero when I started. And I'm growing, but it was one of those things that wasn't really on my radar. Um, as to the Comic Cons, you know, I think with any book that you write, if it's any good, if it's a book that's enjoyable and you get it in people's hands, then you will slowly, by word of mouth, grow your presence in the market. People will hear about you over time. And that's a good thing. So anywhere you can sell it is good. But the weird thing is, people who go to Comic Cons don't seem to go for buying books much. They'll buy action figures, they'll buy you name it, basically anything but books. I've gone to Comic Cons with 500 people and sold 4 books. And that's kind of weird to me. Um, yeah, so there's that one. And then as far as the grocery stores thing and the book signings at Barnes and Noble, you know, what would I say? It's it's hard to get when you don't have any presence at all, it's hard to get people to be willing to do a book signing for you. It's like once you prove yourself a little, then they're more interested in you. But until you do that, nobody's really interested. So it's kind of one of those things. Uh, it's hard to it's really hard to get started, but it's like a snowball that builds momentum as you go.
Yeah. I guess I would say your books do for the action figures, your books do lend themselves to be a probably a gold mine for making action figures and figurines.
If people ever actually got into it and it became a presence in the market, it would be great for it. But it's one of those things where, again, until people are actually interested in the story, the action figures don't draw them in. It's like, what is this a universe we're talking about? They just don't know me. So,
Mhm. Yeah, I guess Jared, if you had to summarize this, going from the first book to the second book, just give the listeners kind of an overview of what to expect going into the second book.
okay, so about what's in the book.
Sure.
Okay, so book one is Brightstar. This is an introduction to the characters in the universe. It's one of those things where as an author you don't want to dump people in the deep end too much. You want to actually give them kind of a slow start in things and let them get accustomed to the sort of world you're talking about and the sort of characters you're building, and let them get attached to the characters some, and then you can start to introduce some of the more interesting stuff, some of the bigger world building stuff, some of the more oh so the second book is called The Vale of Mysteries, and it's not really I'm not really spoiling anything when I tell the readers that The Vale of Mysteries is a great big dust cloud, nebula like dust cloud that is way too dense and kind of a mystery. And it's guarding the planet Sanctuary where the keeper of the mysteries is based. And so the Veil of Mysteries is a concept that as you go through the book, it sort of changes, and then in the end, there's kind of a surprise, or at least I hope it was. And the goal there is, I have a mechanic here that's new to the universe, and it teaches people about some of the history of the universe, and it's a fun adventure and all of that stuff. And we're just making the universe bigger at every step. So we're finally starting to get into some of the bigger concepts and some of the more interesting stuff in book two.
Like what were I mean I feel like I kind of see quite a few like themes. So what were some of like the themes or some of your inspirations like and really I mean I guess like where do you see it going? I guess like how many books do you see writing in this universe?
Well, I mean, if we're talking books the size of Brightstar, I'm looking at least 10 or 15 in this universe. Um, Five in the Epimyth, probably 4 to 5 in the Epimyth. And that is the story of Nate and what he does in the universe. And then from there, you know, going with his friends on some of their journeys as well. So I would say as far as inspirations go, you know, I always go back to my first inspiration being the stories that I came up with as a kid in my head when I was going to bed at night or, using my imagination, whatever. I came up with these great big adventure stories where I was the hero and I had all these friends who would go with me on these adventures in fantasy worlds and space worlds and whatever. And they were all sort of connected because they were all part of the Energemetra 6 universe. So those are sort of that idea of having a main character who is sort of the core of the group, who has these friends who he gathers together, the odds, and they go together on adventures. And then eventually they end up having to go on their own adventures as the story goes on. We're not there yet, but um, in book 3, we'll actually start to see a little bit of that. I'm working on it now. Um, so in that was sort of the whole core of the idea, a universe that could just spread out from the center. And my inspiration here is actually I've asked a couple of different people to collaborate with me on novels in this universe. So, and a couple of them have actually said yes, which is kind of exciting. Now, there's nothing immediately down the road. We haven't started on this yet, but they're projects that I'm looking forward to doing. And the idea is that it isn't just my universe, it's a universe that other people can come into and take part in and have fun with in their worlds as well. And I think that's incredibly cool.
I'm kind of envisioning like one of those mind maps where your story and then you're kind of branching out and then have other authors
Right.
write in the on the different webs. That's a cool idea.
Yeah, that's my hope. And who knows? It isn't like I'm super popular at the moment, so it isn't like I have people flocking to do it. But if they were, I'd still have to be really selective about who I chose. So I'm not terribly sad about that part. I'm actually glad that I get to be, to start slow and to sort of have maybe one or two people who are interested in collaborating on something. And then I can also sort of share some of their books because I like what these other people are doing for their writing. And I want to share that with the world as well. So it's sort of an introduction to them. And that's fun.
So like if what would the ideal person that if they were to come to you and say, I want to write, about this world kind of in your universe, what does that person look like in your eyes?
Well, okay. So I can't remember exactly what we talked about last time, but one of my primary intents, one of my aspirations when I'm doing this is to take some truth out of the world and to bring it in and to leave it in my works and to share it in a way that is not preachy but gives people something valuable that they can grab onto. And so my the ideal person would be somebody who sort of shares that vision where it is a fun story and that is the first requirement, but they also want to reflect the truth of the world around them in their writing. And having a similar view to me of what the truth of out in the world is doesn't hurt, right?
Mhm.
So, because I'm not what I'm really not interested in, to be perfectly frank, is to put a whole bunch of intersectional nonsense into my books that follows the woke mainstream preaching of this this garbage that we're all just so tired of having thrown at us in all of these huge intellectual properties. I don't want any of that. So I don't know. Does that answer your question enough, or shall
I
I?
I think so. Yeah, I mean, our first discussion had a lot of good talking points on like beliefs and
Yeah.
politics and yeah, so it does stand
Well, that
out.
that calls back to that. And so if some, if listeners want to go back and listen to that one to hear what it is what it is I'm thinking about. That's great. But that's the sort of thing that I would love. I would love to create a think of it as a franchise. Think of it as an intellectual property that's sort of open to the right people to come in and just build what they're interested in that universe or attaching to the universe connected to it, where we can have some fun interplay between their universe and mine. I don't want it all to be in my universe. I just want it to sort of, have some crosstalk. And that's a lot of fun. And it also gives an opportunity to network readers with other good authors. So I think that's a great opportunity too.
Sort of going back like a hot second.
Yeah.
When I think previously you said you had like in the size of Brightstar, you had about 10 to 15 books planned.
Yeah.
I guess just did you write Brightstar and then think like, all right, I want to write, 9 to 14 more books? Or did you have it all planned out with essentially like an outline of roughly like what you want to happen going forward?
That's a really good question. So actually, this whole thing goes back to when I was about 12. When I was between 12 and 14, I came up with sort of an outline for the whole world and where I wanted the whole world to go in that time. But I could state that outline to you if I wanted to give spoilers for the whole series, which I really don't. I could state that outline for you here in about 10 sentences. That's all I've got is about those 10 sentences. But I can tell you that those 10 sentences are going to take me about 15 books this size to get through that outline. So it isn't that I wrote Brightstar, then came up with more ideas for it. It was that I sort of had this whole framework to start with, and Brightstar is just the first piece of that puzzle. And I know where it's going, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah. I guess this sort of comes down when you're talking about other authors piggybacking off your universe. Like, there's sort of what you were alluding to. There's got to be a massive vetting process because you don't want someone. I'm assuming you've considered the possibility that someone you could bring in could like corrupt your universe. Like, so like, how would you go? I mean, like, you sort of Jack sort of asked this question, but like the vetting process, I'm assuming would be very in depth.
Yeah. Or maybe I
Yeah.
could just ask him what a Nephilim is. That'd be a good place to start.
Okay.
I'm kind of joking there, but the idea is that so I am a Christian. I believe that there is a creator who made this world, and that out of that there flow certain deep truths that we all sort of have to pay homage to if we're going to exist in the world in a healthy way. And so it isn't that hard to take a look at a book somebody's written, read through it and go, what is this person doing in their book? Do they have a healthy view of the world? And if they do, then I'm happy to have them do something. And as far as corrupting the world goes, it depends on what they're doing in the world. If it's with my main characters, the way those main characters interact with them is something that they're going to have to talk to me about because I know what my story needs to look like. And the way that's going to go into their books, because I own Energemetra 6, the way that goes into their books is going to have to be pretty specific. But when it comes to the way the Energemetra 6 universe interacts with theirs, or what other characters could come out of that, or what the societies and the enemies and the monsters and all of the things about it would do in their universe, all of that's pretty freewheeling and open. And if somebody wants to do something there, that's great. But I do own that intellectual property, so
Yeah.
they do have to have my permission to, you know, to publish there.
I gotta say, I find this idea very creative, and I think we have this image of authors kind of being very isolated, not really collaborating with others, and this would be a way to kind of scale more than an author would be able to on his own.
Okay, well, and here's the other part of this vision that I think is really awesome. we've seen, and I'm just going to go back to what we talked about the woke mind virus that's being preached by the mainstream media and a whole bunch of big corporations that is constantly just thrown at us every day, all day, that's just so destructive. This is an opportunity, if I keep reasonably tight control of who I allow to work in this universe, it's an opportunity to let a whole bunch of people come together to create something that is truly awesome, that allows us to ignore and to move away from some of those other IPs, so that we don't have to be constantly thinking about what so and so is allowing to happen in the Marvel universe or the Star Wars universe or whatever, that's kind of messing things up, or even now Lord of the Rings. It's I mean, it's not, I watched some of Rings of Power the other day. It's not bad, but it's also kind of trending in that direction. You just go, we need variety, we need something else. And so I'm happy to provide some of that, and to provide something that people can network with on that, and bring all of, bring different universes together, provided they're writing something that has a reasonable worldview in it. It doesn't even have They don't even have to agree with me 100%. It just has to be something that doesn't come from what I consider to be a totally toxic perspective, right? And I actually was told the other day that Lovecraft did something similar. I have not read a lot of Lovecraft. I'm not super familiar with it, but if so, that's awesome too.
So you talked about your Christianity. I felt I'm assuming this is intentional, but I felt like a very deep like Christian theme throughout the book. Am I correct to assume that that's intentional?
Well, it's like I say, the way I look at the world, there are things that are true, and my work is going to reflect what I think is true. And so, in that sense, it's intentional. But am I trying to create programming in my work? No, it's just supposed to be a good story, but it's also supposed to have truth in it. Does that does that answer that question?
Yeah. And then I just you brought up Lord of the Rings, and I felt like I mean, without giving any spoilers, I was there a section of the book that was inspired by, the one ring to rule them all in this story? Was there a small section in that? Because I kind of felt like that for a hot second. I don't know,
You,
is that accurate?
okay, the answer to that is I don't know.
Okay.
And the reason I say I don't know is that I haven't I'm what they call a pantser, when you're writing by the seat of your pants and you're not planning out everything ahead. When I say I have an outline, I have literally 10 sentences. I do not plan all the details. And I am as surprised as the reader is sometimes when I'm writing something. Like the scene that I'm writing in book 3 right now, what happened, I don't actually know what I'm about to write. I just know that there's something that has to happen. So I don't know exactly. I did create a possible place for that to be the case, but it also might not be. And I guess we'll just have to find out as the series goes. Sorry.
Okay. Fair enough.
That's interesting. So if you're kind of going off the cuff, how do you normally decide when a book is complete? How do you know when to stop?
Well, when I created the first book and I sent it into the publisher, they told me it was twice as long as it should be. And so could I like trim it down or something? I said, well, maybe I could cut it in half. And so I did. Brightstar is the first half of the book that I originally sent to the publisher, and I reworked it so that it has the correct character arcs and things, and it works. And then the second book, I stopped when I thought I was at a pretty good place. So I write it kind of episodically, which is why I use the comparison to the Odyssey in space. It's written kind of episodically, where you have these situations that the characters get into that don't naturally necessarily have a character arc the first time I write them, and then I bring in other things to make that work out right. So I write enough episodically that that it's about the right length, and then I bring it together, and that's a book. And I don't know if that's the right way to do things or the wrong way to do things or anything. That's just what I've ended up doing.
No, it's interesting because I've heard people kind of go both routes. I mean, are there times where you wish you kind of did have like a mind map or an outline?
I wish that constantly, but here's the thing. When I started writing the prequel to Brightstar when I was 12, I created an actual outline. And I tried doing it as an outliner for 4 years. And by the time I was done, I was so sick of it that I decided I could never do it that way again. I was bored of the story.
Uh,
And I can't afford to do it if I get bored of it. So yes, I really do wish that because it would let me focus on some of the details a little better than I do. And instead, what I actually have to do a lot of times is I have to go back when I'm writing and I have to go, okay, so I've got the basic story written down. Now I have to go back and I have to actually focus on each character separately and go, okay, so what is the up with this character? Did I do this character justice? Did I correctly handle the way they think about the world in this story? And I've actually changed whole chunks of the book later on because I decided it wasn't appropriate. It wasn't right for that character to be doing those things. So, yeah, I really do wish so. It had saved me a lot of work, but I also get bored and can't do it. So,
mhm.
you do what
So,
you can, I guess.
so for you, it's kind of like it's like the process is part of the entertainment, like because you're kind of figuring it out as you go, and that I guess that's part of the enjoyment you get.
It is, and actually, I think that comes through to the reader somewhat. It's like when you read the books, you don't exactly know what's going to happen next at any point, and hopefully, it keeps you entertained as you go. And the goal, the way I do that is partly because I don't exactly know what's going to happen next, and I'm entertained as I'm going along. So,
Mhm.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so going back to the point you were just making about having to go back and like rewrite characters because you didn't feel like they would be doing what they should be doing.
Yeah.
Uh, do you is that like hard? Is it hard? You have a lot of characters in your book. Is it hard to keep that straight of like going forward, sort of almost contradicting the characters in the past? Like, is that a challenge when you're writing? Like keeping everything straight of not only like how the character should act and behave, but necessarily just, continuity, I guess, within the story.
It is tough in some ways, and I have my beta readers point out continuity problems here and there in small ways usually. I don't usually get the big things wrong. With the characters, I don't have a lot of problems, and I'll get back to that in a second. But when it comes to some things, um, like I can't my daughter actually, my 12-year-old daughter pointed out a continuity error to me in this beta reading process. I'm like, oh, good job. That was great. Good catch. Um, so I do catch those things occasionally, but usually it's to do with circumstances. Usually it's to do with what happened in the world at this time, what was going on in history. Those are the things where I tend to have continuity errors. And the reason for that is that the characters are actually almost alive to me. Like I think of Nate is no longer me. That's not the case. That was originally how I came up with the universe, but as I've been writing this, Nate is his own person. John and Rachel and all of the other characters in these books are their own people. And I think of them almost like close friends. And, if you think of your friends, you can go, well, he kind of likes this and he doesn't like that. And he wouldn't do that. And he would do this. And you can kind of get a general idea of what your friends are like just by, you know, your experience of them. And they'll occasionally surprise you. And interestingly enough, when you create as an author, when you create a character in your mind, if you really try to be true to that character, you will be writing along and you'll go, you know what? He wouldn't do that. And actually, sometimes when you're reading books, you'll be reading along and you'll go, this is screwed up. He wouldn't do that. Right? I mean, you read books and you go, this broke my immersion. This character is acting out of character. I see it in TV shows all the time.
I was about to say that. I feel like I find that incredibly annoying when characters in TV shows will just
Right.
absolutely change for no reason. They just start doing
Right.
totally weird things.
Okay, so after the first season of a TV show, when they do that, you can look at that character and you can go, no, in this circumstance, if I'm being true to this character as the author, he's going to be doing this. right? Even as a watching the
Yeah.
TV show, you can kind of do that. As an author, if you're really being careful and you're being honest about your work and you're trying to do your characters justice, that's what you end up doing. You go through and you go with the character. Is this character going to be doing this? Is this true to their personality? Is this really the way they'd be acting? And if not, why the heck am I writing this? Why is this story doing this? I need to be doing something different. You can see it in TV shows when you're watching them. As a writer, it's that much stronger, and hopefully, a good writer pays attention to that.
Would you, how would you describe your empathy levels over the course of your writing history? Have you gotten more empathetic as you, because it's kind of like you're having to think about other people's feelings and how they're acting.
It's sort of
Okay.
funny. I was this brings my personal history into it a bit, but do you know what makes a narcissist? A broken empath.
Sorry, you cut. I didn't hear you, Jared.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, sorry. I
Okay.
think I think I froze.
So do you know what makes a narcissist? What makes a
Uh,
narcissist is a broken empath. If you take a person who has very strong natural empathic tendencies and you subject them to a narcissist for a long period of time, it will turn them into a narcissist as well. I One of the ways I discovered that I am tend to be a very empathic person is that I started to go down that road, and it was because I was exposed to a narcissist for a long time, and I started to become one, and I'm like, you know what? I see real clearly. And so I actually had to explore that whole field of things. And what I come up with is this, that I actually have a very strong tendency to be empathic. And it took very traumatic events for me to develop a thick enough skin to function in normal society in some ways. But the reality is, if you are very empathic, it becomes much easier to do those sorts of things as far as the characters go.
sorry, I'm yeah, I froze again. But did you say a narcissist is when you take someone that's empathetic, a broken empathetic person, and you expose them to a narcissist? Did I catch that correctly?
Something like that. Yeah. If you take someone who is empathic and you expose them to a narcissist, especially put them under the control of a narcissist, it will break them and turn them into a narcissist.
But okay, this is going to become somewhat philosophical, but then don't you have to have like an initial narcissist?
You kind of do, don't you?
So isn't
Although,
that sort of a paradox?
although we all have tendencies to go in those directions somewhat, right? I mean, the Christian way to say it would be sin is common to man, but the idea is just that we all have tendencies to go down bad paths sometimes, but we also have the ability to influence other people and to make them worse. You can't say that it wouldn't develop in a person ever, but you would say that it is possible to make it much worse.
Okay, interesting.
Hmm? There's a rabbit hole we could go down for a very long time.
I guess I don't think about this that much. Um,
I think about all of these things all the time, which is part of what makes me an effective writer, I guess. The way people work is like an absolute mystery, and it's fascinating to me, and it also tells me something about the way the world works. And so both of those things together have been like my life's work to study those things, and that thus I put them into my writing. Hopefully it makes it better.
No, I'd say, I mean, talking to you is breath of fresh air for sure. I was just at a conference and one of the main speakers was showing how as we get older, our creativity levels go down. And it's kind of just, I'm guessing like the world beating us down, but you seem to be very creative still. And it's yeah, it's nice
Think
to hear.
think of creativity as a muscle. When you exercise and develop your muscles, they get stronger. And yeah, they might atrophy some as you get older, but if you stay healthy, if you stay fit as you get older, those muscles are never going to get to be terrible. And there are 80-year-olds who could beat the snot out of me, man. So just to say that you don't have quite the level of creativity that you might have had at 18 when you're 80 doesn't mean that you can't be more creative at 80 than 99% of 18-year-olds.
Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of it, I guess, I don't know, I guess I'd be interested in your thoughts is I think
Yeah.
a lot of it is people get, at least for me personally, you sort of get into a routine and I feel like a lot of people just sort of go on to like autopilot, like it's just like, you wake up, you go to work, it's like whatever, you're done with work, you go eat dinner, do whatever hobby is set for the day. And like the creativity needed to ha live somewhat of a fulfilling life is kind of taken away because your life becomes so routine. I think that's a lot of it. And at least how I've seen a lot of my own thought processes change. I guess I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. Or
Yeah, man.
how to keep like creativity up. Like, are you
Well,
just constantly thinking of new things to do or
well, there was a time for about 8 years before I wrote this book, I was working at a job that was pretty repetitive. It was kind of exactly what you're talking about, where I did exactly that. And I had to work during that time to continue to be creative on things. I had to intentionally do that. It isn't something that you can just kind of ignore and expect it to stay. It's something that you have to work at. And now as I have to keep writing, I'm sort of forced to keep being creative and I've actually gotten back to more what I could do creatively when I was 18, 19, 20 today. I'm closer to that today than I was 2 years ago when I started writing Brightstar. Actually, I was in the middle of it then, but yeah, 2 years ago I wasn't as creative as I am now, but it's just because I've sort of redeveloped that by doing it. So if you find that you feel like it's lacking, find the area where you tend to be drawn to be creative, whether that, for some people it's writing, but for a lot of people it's art. It's actually engineering is an incredibly creative thing in a lot of ways. It's a different kind of creativity in some sense, but it's very creative. Um, my dad and my uncles are all very engineering brain people, and the creative stuff they come up with is pretty cool. Um, so, whatever it is that gets you going, whether it's gardening, even gardening can be fairly creative. Whatever it is, you do it and it develops that back to what it you want it to be, hopefully.
yeah, I mean, I guess just this is just an anecdote, but even today I felt like sort of I mean personally, like I felt like I was just going on autopilot through work, just sort of going through the same thing. And then like at the end of the day, my boss gave me like an interesting assignment that did not have uh, a very obvious answer. And like,
Yeah,
it was like a light switch going on. I just immediately felt way more awake and way more alert just because like thinking about, just essentially getting like the creative juices going, like all
right.
these different ways I could do this. And yeah, it feels good, I guess.
It does, and it's a muscle you develop, and some people have more natural capacity in one direction than another, and I don't see a problem with that. There's many ways to be creative as there are human beings. That's sort of one of the beautiful things about us. We're all different. But yeah, absolutely, man. Don't let it atrophy. Don't let it go. Actually engage in it, even if it's a hobby. Like when I was doing this job, my hobby was I was building a video game. And it wasn't as creative an outlet as I needed at the time, but it did some, and it sort of kept me going. And then I got back into the writing, and things started really blossoming again. So Yeah.
And I guess to your gardening point, we we just read the book Ikigai a couple episodes ago, and I think it was a very large percentage, like 90% of the blue zone. So people or areas that have large percentages of centenarians or people who live over
Yeah.
100 years old participate in gardening. So
Yeah.
it's health and creativity.
Absolutely. Well, creativity is a part of health.
Yeah.
People who lose that creativity lose some of their reason to live.
Mm.
They really do. I have a lot of relatives I love who are getting older, and you can tell the ones who are um, still vigorous, still doing their thing, still, you know, my grandpa was in his 90s. He didn't get quite to 100, but he was in his 90s when he died, and he was out in his shop working up until just a few years before he died. And it was what part of what kept him going was building little things, doing these things around the house, being creative in that way. And I would say that's true of I have an uncle who's really dear to me who lives near me, and that's one of the things. He gardens. He loves to garden. He doesn't get to do it the way he probably ought to, but he's growing. He grew a garden this past year. He says, "Oh, I might not do it next year." I'm like, "Yeah, you better do it next year." He does it, and it's a good thing for him to do. It keeps him going. So whatever it is that gets that going for you. My dad right now is building a geothermal greenhouse in his
Oh, wow.
backyard. And watching he dug the hole, he found the model for the greenhouse, he dug the hole, he's buried the pipes, he's doing all the work himself, but he had to do some of the engineering to make things work, and that's part of what keeps him going is he solves these problems and he builds this thing, and when he's done, he has been creative, he has created this thing, and then he gets to grow plants in it, which he enjoys doing too. So, you know, whatever it is that floats your boat, man, but exercise that.
Yeah, and I feel like most importantly, it just keeps your mind from like deteriorating. And I think I mean, it's sort of sad, but a lot of the people that you see have like Alzheimer's or dementia, like they're not often active and they're sort of like couch potatoes kind of. I think it's like a protection for the brain almost.
It is. It's a combination of things. That and diet have a lot to do with Alzheimer's. If you're not eating enough
Yes.
fats,
Yeah.
actually your brain is made of fats, and if you don't eat enough of it, it'll give you Alzheimer's.
I guess just I mean you just sort of threw this out there, so I have to ask you
Yeah.
about it. But what happened to the video game? And what was the video game about?
The video game was called Energemetra 6 Diaspora.
Okay.
Okay.
That's kind of what I thought.
Okay, so well, I was using the lore I had, right? And it's shelved right now. The problem I was running into is that the tech was advancing faster than I could keep up with it with just me doing it. I'd need a team of like 10 or 15 people working on it full time for 6 months, and then I could have something useful. But that's still several $100,000 worth of investment to try to get the thing. I still think it's a viable idea. I still think it's pretty unique and interesting and cool, but it is currently shelved. And I don't know, if this writing were to take off and I were to be able to spare the time, I would love to put a team together and actually build the thing. But I just don't have I don't have the bandwidth, and it's not a project that I can break into myself, is what I discovered after trying it for a few years.
Were you envisioning like I mean that I don't know the technical term, but what's like World of Warcraft? Like there's the technical term for that type of game.
MMORPG.
Yeah. Is that what you were envisioning?
No,
Okay.
I was envisioning an MMORTS, which is which
I don't
is
know that I don't know the
okay.
difference.
So you guys know StarCraft, Warcraft 3, the games where you command a little army and you move it around on a board and you fight
Yeah,
other armies, sort of a thing. I was
sure.
imagining something like that, but in a big universe where you have a whole bunch of people playing on the board at the same time, and um, building your own little country and doing your own thing in a universe, in a galaxy with 100, 200, 500, 1,000 other people.
Okay. Interesting.
Sounds fun.
And I had it actually working. It just wasn't good enough, and I couldn't make it good enough fast enough that I could get people interested in it. So it went away for a while.
Hmm. How did you even go about starting the process to learn how to do a video game?
Well, I actually this is a really interesting subject. If you were to decide that you wanted to do that, you could do it. You would have to go online and you would have to learn how to code. You
Hmm.
would have to learn how to create the things you were looking at. You'd break the project down into chunks that you could manage. So in the case of an MMO game, you have the server and you have the client, and you have to build server code and you have to build client code. The client code's what's on the user's computer, the server code's on the server computer. You have to build both pieces that do the thing, especially, there are some frameworks like Unreal, and I can't remember the other one that's common, but there are frameworks that let you do those things in a sort of a ready-made way, but they're mostly built for games that are RPGs where you're first person, you're walking around doing stuff, or you've got this overhead view. There isn't anything that really worked for what I wanted, so I had to start from scratch. And so I broke it down into manageable chunks. The first question, this is back in the like early to mid 2000 era, is could you create a 3D game in a browser where people could actually move the world around and see lots of different things in just a browser window that was served by a server? How could you go about that? So I created a system that could do that. Back in the mid 2000s, it was working with that technology then, which I thought was pretty impressive. I was pretty happy. It looked like a galaxy. You could drag it around and move it and move back and forth in it and stuff like that, and it was pretty cool. Um, and then can you create a server that can talk to this client side in such a way as to not give them information they're not supposed to have, but give them what they need when they need it? You break the thing down into chunks and you do it. One of the things that I'm trying to teach my kids is to be self-motivated learners. That means you pick a goal and you figure out how to get to that goal, and you don't let anything stop you. Right? If you don't know something, you go learn it. If you don't have something, you find a way to get it. Whatever it is you're doing, you find a way to get to your goal. You learn how to get there. That is, I think, the most important skill any person could teach another, because with that, you can go do anything you want to do. And guys, I do not have family members who write books. I never knew a person who had published a book that I know of before I wrote Brightstar. It isn't something where I had people teach me how to do it. I just learned how to do it and did it. And now I've done it. And now I'm learning how to get better at selling it so that hopefully people can read it.
Mhm. No, that's a great lesson for people to take away. I'm kind of curious, what are your kids gravitating to? What types of problems are they looking to solve?
Well, my oldest really likes gardening, actually.
Okay.
It's something of he has been growing a garden on his own initiative for several years now. I have a
Oh.
hard time doing that because I have really terrible seasonal allergies. So, terrible hay fever. So I go outside for 10 minutes and I'm ready to my face feels like it's a waterfall. I'm like, I'm terrible. He's been growing a garden for the last several years. He's asked friends and relatives. I told you about the uncle who's near me who loves gardening. He has asked how to go about it. My second is, I don't know what does exactly, but she does all these crafty things. She recently made a quilt from scratch. She had never made a quilt before for a baby shower she's going to at some point in the near future. She made a quilt. She'd never done it. She asked relatives and she figured out how to do it, put it together herself, and it actually came out really good. My third is 10. He is mostly just a reader right now. He reads anything he can get his hands on. He isn't solving a lot of problems yet, but that's my third. My fourth is he's 7 years old and he is building a lean-to shelter against the side of a building one of my outbuildings.
A lean-to shelter. What is that? I don't know what that is.
You don't know what a lean-to is?
It's
It's
like
No.
a shelter that is made usually with whatever materials you can find to keep the weather off of your often a sleeping area or whatever, but in his case it's just a play area. But
Ah,
he's taking boards and stuff that are extra, and he's creating a shelter, and he's getting better at it every time every time he redoes it, he refactors it, it gets a little better, and he's building this shelter beneath which he can make his little mud pies or whatever it is he's doing at the time.
awesome professional fort builder. Very nice.
I mean, whatever.
That's
It's kids
yeah.
play, but it's teaching
No,
them how
that's
to do this
awesome. Yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
yeah.
that's you're I think you've hit the nail on the head that is like the most important thing to teach people.
Well, and really there's only one secret to it. And well, there are two things. Number one is anybody can do things if they set their mind to it. Some of us are going to be slower at some things than others, right? I have I actually don't naturally have a language arts brain. I had to develop that. I actually have strong tendencies toward math. I was very, very good at math naturally, but I didn't do the language arts thing except that I really enjoyed it. So I practiced it and I got better at it. I had to write something that was literally 5 times this thick to be good enough at writing a story to write something that was decent. Um, so so the first thing is it doesn't matter so much whether or not you have natural talent for it. If you have a love for it and you commit to it and stick to it, you can learn to do it. And the second thing is we have this thing in our society. It's like this, my cousin had a term for it and I can't remember it right now, but it's sort of a learned disability. It's like this learned thing where you go, I'm not able to accomplish XYZ. I got stuck. And you let it
Yes.
stop you. And you let it stop you. Don't do that. Don't let it stop you. That's it. Decide that you want to do something and don't let anything stop you. Like, I will run through a brick wall to make this book work. 2 years from now, I will have run through several brick walls in order to make this book work because that's just what I'm going to have to do. I'm not going to let it stop me. I will learn what I need to learn, whether it's digital marketing or, if I have to sell things to people in public. I've never worked retail in my life, guys. I'm sitting in grocery stores trying to sell my book to random people walking by. I'll figure it out, whatever it takes.
Awesome. And the other thing, I mean, to that point is like I feel like a lot of times it's I don't have the proper certification, so I need to like get someone else to do it type of mentality instead of just I can figure it out on my own or I can figure out how to do this.
There's
I feel like
there's
I
a
see that a lot as
there's
well.
a proper balance there. We have really fallen off the edge of the proper certification end of that. Most of the time, you don't need any certification. What you need is motivation. And if you're motivated to do it, you can learn how to do it, even if you can't show a certification. The certifications will help you prove to other people that you're able to do it or to get a job being a drone, doing something that you hate because that's where most of us have ended up. And I had my time doing that sort of thing where you get a job doing something you hate because you got certified or you got an education in that area or whatever it is. But the reality is the education should follow the motivation. It shouldn't be the other way around where, if you have a motivation to be creative in a particular area, get into that area, start doing things, start actually creating things that are useful, interesting things. Even if it's like, um, I have uncles who, when they were kids, would build things with electronics in their parents' um, garage. My dad's oldest brother became a sensor designer for sensors that like can testing. You know how soup cans and canned goods? He became a sensor designer, designing sensors to make the can sealing machines and things like that work properly and to detect whether they were working properly. he was on the cutting edge of his field. He was an electrical engineer. He ended up going to school for it, but it was because he had a passion for creating things with electronics. And he let that carry him into an area that he enjoyed.
Good advice.
Yeah, I wish I could give that advice to a lot more people to just don't let anything stop you and do something you're interested in.
Yeah, I mean, we
No,
were also, I mean, what you're saying also triggered a couple, correct me if I'm wrong, Al. I think it was the Hidden Potential book where we were discussing the Finnish education system and how, and this goes back to kind of
yeah,
like your how culture and politics are kind of
Yeah,
intermingled. But there in Finland, it seems like it's more embedded in the culture that every kid has the capability to flourish, basically. And
yeah,
the author of this book was kind of saying in America, we tend to gravitate towards the people that are showing, quote unquote excellence early on, and you're kind of pigeonholed, and maybe it's not
yeah.
really expected that everyone is able to actually solve all these problems or acquire different skills.
Well, it's like I say, what I'm teaching my kids, I'm trying to teach them some basic skills. We're actually homeschooling, and we do the whole reading, writing, arithmetic thing. We get them the basic knowledge, we do the history, we do the, political science, all the stuff that you have to do for a basic knowledge set, we do. But our primary focus and the thing that I really try to stress is, can you teach yourself to do the things that you're interested in? Are you interested in these things? Okay, how do you do it? How do you get there? And make them figure it out from a very young age how to get where they want to go, because you teach them that pattern and it becomes a lifelong habit of teaching yourself the things that you're interested in. The second one is entrepreneurship. And what I mean by that is, can you create value for people? That's the basic way that we survive in the world, is by creating value for other people. So, like, can 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 you cut a piece of metal into a smaller piece and put it up on eBay to sell to somebody who needs that piece of metal? Can you do it in a way that is economical enough that you could actually make money doing it? You know, Entrepreneurship. My kids started a bakery business a few years ago. They were 12 and 10 at the time, and they would walk around town, knock on doors, selling muffins and cookies and brownies that they had baked. And they had to pay for the ingredients, and they got to keep the profits. And so you teach people to actually provide value for other people, and that's how you actually get rewarded in the world, is by doing that. And that's how we create a productive society.
Awesome.
Very
yeah. We
basic
both,
stuff.
you
Go
know,
ahead.
we both would buy a bulk candy from Sam's Club when we were middle schoolers
That's
and then sell them to
that's
our
true.
classmates.
Yeah, man.
Uh, I think
100%.
it's a lot of printing money when you sell essentially sugar to 12-year-olds. Uh, I guess just you were talking about, do you have a way, or is there like a path you go by trying of how you try and get your kids, like how you nurture their interests or how you try and get them to figure out what they're interested in?
You know, I have never seen a kid who wanted to sit on his butt and do nothing unless you gave him an excuse. Like, you put him in front of a television, you give them something where, or in front of a video game, you give them time where they can just sit in front of something and veg, then they'll do that. Otherwise, if you don't allow them to veg, they will go be creative naturally. That's part of what makes humans humans, is that I have never seen a kid who wouldn't go, like, build a fort with Legos, or go outside and climb a tree, or whatever it is they're interested in. And if you limit it reasonably, which we do for our kids, they do get to play games here and there, they do get to watch stuff in the evenings, whatever, but we require them to go do things. And just by requiring them to go do things, number one, they aren't bored very much because they know how to entertain themselves. And number two, they actually do that themselves. They find their interests and they gravitate toward it. And then you, as a parent or a teacher or whatever, you have to pay attention to what it is they're gravitating toward and provide them fodder for it, give them something to feed it, and show that you have interest in what they're doing. And that will provide all of the fuel they need.
Great.
And I have 7 kids, man. I'm slowly becoming uh, I'm slowly becoming more of an expert in this than I ever thought I would.
No, you're definitely the person to be directing these questions to, I think.
I guess, man. I don't know. I don't. It isn't like. Then again, the weird thing is people who take classes in childhood education or whatever, they don't actually seem to be very good at helping kids to learn. They seem to be more good at helping to keep kids organized and orderly. And that actually is, in some sense, it's contraindicated. You want kids to have the opportunity to go do whatever it is they're interested in a disorganized fashion. And then as they get older, you teach them to have the capacity to be orderly as they choose to and as they need to. So, like, if I'm trying to get work done and I have 50 things to do, I have to divide those up and be systematic in how I approach them, or I'm going to be ineffective, right? So, that's just not an option. It has to happen that way. So teaching your kids that's a skill you can teach them, but trying to make that be the basis for how they act is actually a great way to program them not to be creative.
Hmm.
Okay,
That's
yeah.
interesting.
Interesting.
So maybe our education system is what's to blame for our creativity levels going down over time.
Yeah,
Now,
I was gonna say it's like a knock against school because I feel like school just teaches you to be organized and like check boxes kind of.
now, here's what's really going to bake your noodle.
Okay.
That was intentional. From the beginning, the people who designed the education system in this country did that on purpose. I've actually looked into some of that history, and it is enough to make your blood boil.
We've discussed, I mean, it seems to have come, I think like the German system kind
Yep.
of they want to silo you, be good worker bees,
Yep.
get efficient at one skill or doing one task. So yeah.
And that
Yeah,
makes you easier to
yeah,
control and easier
right.
to direct and easier to program and easier to get to do what they want. And it becomes sort of a self-perpetuating problem. Well,
Hmm.
I think it's a problem. I'm not putting my kids through that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Al, any we're starting to come,
Yeah.
I think a little over
So
an hour. Al, any other questions?
Yeah, I think Jared, as last time, it was good having you on. It was a pleasure talking to you. I guess do we have any? Can you give us any spoilers for what happens to Nate in book 3?
um well, let's just say in book 1, we got to see Nate fighting an enemy up close and personal. In book 2, we get to see Nate fighting a whole lot more enemies in a way that is less personal. And now, not that there aren't some up close and personal moments in there, but in book 3, there is a whole lot more action, a whole lot quicker. I dove right into the action, and I'm still writing action about a quarter of the way through, and I started the uh the first words of the book that I have in my draft are Adamant charged like a mother grizzly to the rescue of her captured cubs, and we went from there.
Yeah.
Very
Do
nice.
we have a title for book 3? I guess.
I have a working title. I'm thinking it's going to be Against the Odds, and that's a bit of a
Okay.
spoiler, but I'm not sure. We'll see. Um, yeah. Now, the other thing I didn't mention yet that I also ought to mention is as well at the same time I'm releasing Vale of Mysteries, I'm releasing the first book in my fantasy series, which is Winter Night. And
Ah,
that's a whole other ball of wax, and that's another fun one. And they hopefully those are both coming out Black Friday. That's my hope. I had to push it back a couple of weeks, but pre-sales start on November 16th.
cool. And where can they go to get the books?
So I would much prefer people come to my website. That's e6universe.com. Just for people's reference, if you go to Amazon and you buy an author's book, they're getting maybe $1 or $2 a book. If you go to my website and buy the book, I'm getting everything but the printing cost and the cost of postage. And that does a lot more to support me, e6universe.com. There are actually 4 things people ought to know about. Number one, if you go to e6universe.com and you sign up for my email list, you will get ebooks of every book I release as they come live for free. I am not charging for the ebooks. I'm just sending them out to my whole email list, every single book I write. Second thing, I have an audiobook podcast I'm doing every Wednesday. We're reading Brightstar. We're on chapter 5 right this week, and we just did. And we'll be reading basically all of the books I'm writing over time. Now they'll be released slowly because we're only doing a chapter a week. But if people are interested more in the audiobook side, it's a multicast audiobook podcast. I've got different people coming in to read different characters. We're having fun with it. That's if you search Energemetra 6 in any podcast app, you go to e6universe.com, there's a link to it, or you go to energemetra6.com, that's where it's at. And then you can find I do have the physical books are available at e6universe.com, and I'm working on the professional audiobooks that'll be available on Audible and other such places, but that's still out in the future.
Awesome. You are one busy guy.
Nauseatingly busy. Thanks for having me on, guys. This has been fun. I really enjoy the conversation. Thanks for giving me fuel for some more writing tomorrow. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
This is great.
it's been great.
And with that
Jake,
said, please reach out to us at brothersonbooks@gmail.com for any book recommendations, or if you'd like to be a guest host for a particular book you have in mind, a great review or rating on whichever platform you're listening to this would be greatly appreciated. And lastly, if you can think of any friend, family member, or coworker that might like this episode, please pass it along. I am Jack Alwell, and with me, as always, is my brother Alex Alwell, and with special guest Jared Michaud.
Thanks, guys.
Till next time.
oh wait, Jack, what book are we doing next time?
That's a good question, Al. We are reading the book Follow the Science by Cheryl Atkinson. And this is How Big Pharma Misleads, Obscures, and Prevails.
I think this will be an interesting one.
Yeah. Okay, until next time.
Awesome.